I invented a whole bunch of general education courses. I was a firm believer in general education. I didn't know it. That's what I wanted to do. Kids who had no interest and who all the prerequisites they could breathe on a mirror and had a pulse, and they could get into my classes. I had no prerequisites. I wanted to teach my parents, and I've invented the course on Yiddish culture. My parents came out of that culture. I also knew that Hitler was something unique in world history, and I got two courses on German culture, both dealing with the rise of Nazism. And I felt every undergraduate should know something about the rise of Nazism, how it happens. And so I invented these courses. I taught it in the Fletcher School. I taught it in the undergraduate college. No prerequisites. You didn't have to know anything. I had engineers, museum school students, dyslexics, everybody under the sun. They could take that course. All you needed to get into it, as I said, was a pulse themselves and could breathe on a mirror, and they were able to get into the course.
Okay, it's a great pleasure for me to tell you that joining us now on Open Book is Professor Saul Gittleman. He's the Professor Emeritus and former Provost of Tufts University. Now, he's written several books, but his most recent book is An Accidental Triumph, The Improbable History of American Higher Education. What a time to be talking to you, sir. And just as a way of background, I met Professor Gittleman. He probably may not remember this as well as I remember it, but I met him in November of 1981. So this is 43 short years ago. I had a lot of pimples on my face. I took the Eastern Shuttle to Boston to spend some time with you. And you told me to get my, well, you were very polite. You never use any bad words or anything like that, but you told me to get my stuff together,
Yeah.
Professor. And I tried to do that over the.
What was the name of that good friend that you had? Was it close to Trump? Also a Tufts graduate.
Yeah, his name is Billy Tomaso.
Tommaso, the concrete business, right?
Yeah. So Billy was in the
Billy
concrete.
Bill Tommaso, nice man who really loved you.
Yeah. Well, he loved my dad. So, you know, I lost my dad last year, but my dad, at that time in my dad's life, he had graduated from being a crane operator who was actually weighing trucks. So this is how the butterfly effect, right? It's all, you know, so my dad's weighing trucks. He strikes up a relationship with Billy Tomaso. Billy Tomaso is a former Tufts graduate. I think there's some study halls and so forth named after Billy.
Yeah.
And he said, okay, well, don't send your son to the local school. I want you to send him to a place called Tufts. My father thought Tufts was spelled Toughs, just to give you a sense for.
Well, there are a lot of colleges in this country. That's one of the things that's remarkable about it. We've got 6,000 institutions that give degrees.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you were very, very dear to me then. You're very, very dear to me now. But my first memory of you was I went up the stairs at Ballou Hall. You were in that beautiful office of the provost.
Yeah.
And you told me my SAT scores were not good. They were okay, but I needed to take them again. And but I got into Tufts, and then we stayed close. And you were instrumental in me getting into Harvard. You probably don't remember that, but you
were instrumental too. You suddenly went from being a Dems D's Does kid from Long Island to Phi Beta Kappa. You got accepted to Harvard Law School.
I took it seriously, Saul, but you helped me.
I did, but you had a lot going on between your ears. And without what you had already, it wouldn't have happened. So we both can complement each other. But I remember you as becoming a remarkable student.
All right. Well, it's very, very sweet of you. Okay, you joined Tufts in 1964, if I remember correctly, because that's the year of my birth. So that's 60 years ago. But you've been in higher education for 7 decades.
Yep.
I have that correct.
Next birthday is number 90.
Yeah, and you look great. God bless. And, you know, so I expect to be at your 110th birthday. Hopefully you'll still like me at that point and you'll invite me. But let's talk about the choice of going into higher education for somebody like you, very, very gifted man, could have done anything. You were also a great athlete and a great baseball player. But let's start with the choices that you made and your origin.
You know, so much in life is serendipitous, Anthony. You've learned that yourself. It's an accident. My parents were East European immigrants who never spent a day in a school anywhere, neither in Europe nor in America. They snuck into this country after World War I. My father came illegally, my mother came legally, and settled down. But they never learned. My mother couldn't read or write. And so when it came time to go to college, they were going to push me onto it, particularly my mother, but they knew nothing about colleges, absolutely nothing. They wouldn't have been able to name one. And prestige meant nothing in those days. This was the 1950s. I had started elementary school in 1930. So I had a long educational experience from the 30s on. And my baseball coach, Mr. Bocari, came home one day and said, Saul will go to Drew. That's where I did my Navy V-12 program during World War II, he told them. And so whatever Mr. Bocari said was fine. And the next thing I know, Sydney's basketball player, Saul, baseball player, we didn't even apply. We just showed up on the campus in Madison, New Jersey as ball players, and we were accepted. The manager of the team asked me, what are you going to major in? I said, what's a major? I thought it was an Army rank. And he said, well, it sounds like you don't know too much about colleges. I'm the German teacher here. You'll major in German. I'll take care of you. So I go home and told my parents, I'm going to major in German. I never studied it before, not in high school. Nobody studied German. And the next thing I know, I'm a German major and on a pathway to a career as a German teacher. So accidents, showing up at Drew, changing my life. They were a little Methodist school, and it changed my life. There are thousands of little colleges in America that give kids like me that kind of opportunity.
So, but Saul, you were arguably one of the most passionate teachers. I took as many of your courses as I could take. So you had a passion for education, and you had a passion for lecturing. And am I wrong? Tell me.
I was a performer. I didn't know it. I didn't know myself. Teaching and what you get a degree in, you get a PhD eventually. It's a research degree. The only thing you're really taught is how to do research. Nobody teaches you how to teach. If you got it, you got it. If you don't have it, you don't have it. And the vast majority of the 1.5 million faculty in this country, none of us was trained to teach. Very few PhD programs spend any time in training people to teach. They train them to do research. The PhD degree is a German invented degree. The Germans invented it. We wanted it. We took it and trained generations of PhDs to be scholars. If you happen to be a performer, and I was a performer, you're a performer. You have a certain gift of being able to present material. And I learned that, and it came intuitively. And I also knew to keep my own opinion out of the lectures. So when kids would ask me, well, how do you feel about this? I say, it's none of your damn business. All I'm doing is presenting the information, the facts, and as much as I can, the evidence. And I happen to be a good teacher. It was the luck, just a lot of luck.
Okay, well, we're going to get into the book in a second, but there were a couple seminal courses when you were at Tufts University. The hardest courses to get into were your courses. And so there were 3 courses I took as an undergrad, and one I came back to the school from Harvard and took at Fletcher. I don't know if you remember that, but I took a diplomacy course with you. I actually wrote a paper in that diplomacy course related to FDR and decisions that were made by FDR during the Holocaust. But the 4 courses I took, one was called German Writers.
Yeah.
One was the Introduction to Yiddish Literature.
Yeah.
And then there was
where you learned all your Yiddish.
I learned Yiddish. Yeah, I'm one of the few guys out here on Long Island, Saul, that knows the difference between a Shagus and a Shiksa. See that?
But you also learned Schadenfreude.
I did. I learned Schadenfreude, which is we're going to talk about that as well. But why those courses, Saul? Why teach German writers? Why teach about Yiddish literature? Why teach about diplomacy during the Second World War?
You know, I was a generalist. I was told, teach your courses and teach anything you want. That was the message I got from the dean, who gave me tenure at Tufts. He put his hands on my head and said, Poof, you have tenure. Now don't go. Teach whatever you want. And that's fine. And I invented a whole bunch of general education courses. I was a firm believer in general education. I didn't know it, But I wound up, that's what I wanted to do. Kids who had no interest and who all the prerequisites they could breathe on a mirror and had a pulse, and they could get into my classes. I had no prerequisites. I wanted to teach my parents, and I've invented the course on Yiddish culture. My parents came out of that culture. I also knew that Hitler was something unique in world history, and I had got 2 courses on German culture, both dealing with the rise of Nazism. And I felt every student every undergraduate should know something about the rise of Nazism, how it happens. And so I invented these courses. I taught it in the Fletcher School. I taught it in the undergraduate college. No prerequisites. You didn't have to know anything. I had engineers, museum school students, dyslexics, everybody under the sun. They could take that course. All you needed to get into it, as I said, was a pulse themselves and could breathe on a mirror, and they were able to get into the course.
So it's 40 years for me now, Saul. I'm taking those courses, and so I'm gonna say a couple of things to you, and I want you to react. Okay?
Yep.
I'm gonna say the word Tazio.
You know, Tazio was the character in Thomas Mann's Death in Venice, the young 14-year-old boy that Gustav von Aschenbach fell in love with. So I had kids like you reading stories like Death in Venice. You discovered Thomas Mann. You discovered Sholem Aleichem. You discovered that there was a thing called literature that you could learn about human nature from. And
you didn't have Magic Mountain on your syllabus, but I ended
no,
up
it was too long. It was too long.
I ended up reading Magic Mountain as a result of you.
Yeah.
So when I say Tazio, you know what I'm talking about, right?
Oh, sure. Do you remember the scene in Death in Venice when Gustav von Aschenbach stopped
with the overripe strawberries? You
remember overripe strawberries, and he killed himself.
40 years later, I still remember, right? So you must have impacted me somehow, right?
Yeah.
But the point was the messaging. Tell me if I got this wrong. You were describing the Eastern European Jews and their culture of suppression and oppression. And they were telling very interesting stories at that time. One of the stories was the lottery ticket. It left a very big impression on me. One of the stories was Gimple the Fool.
Yeah.
And of course, you had the Tevier stories that Shalom Aleichem wrote about.
Mm-hmm.
And these were about family. They were about commitment to culture, commitment to religion. They were about love. What else were they about, Saul?
They were also about not understanding what your children were all about. Yes. I mean, don't forget, Tevye, who was an Orthodox, observant, Hasidic Jew, had 2 daughters. One married a Jewish communist. The other married a Gentile communist. The one who married the Gentile communist said to her father, he's another Gorky. He's the second Gorky. And Tevye said, so who was the first Gorky? Tevye knows nothing about what's going on around him in Russia at the end of the 19th or the beginning of the 20th century. And young Jewish kids were dropping Torah, dropping Bible, weren't interested in that. They had discovered a new Bible, Karl Marx. Yeah. And Tevye had no idea what was going on. And so that part of it, not understanding children and their parents, that was a big part of that course also. A tragedy for Tevye.
When I was reading that as a young man, I felt the emphasis on culture, the value system. You also put in that course things about reform as the Jews left Europe and came to the United States. Goodbye, Columbus.
Yeah.
The Philip Roth stories.
It becomes relevant for today's trouble that's going on the campuses, because where did those people want to go? They didn't want to go to Palestine. They wanted to come to the United States.
Right. And
millions did. But when you got into your FDR research, you also found out that the United States closed its doors in the 20s and 30s, shut them tight. We didn't want those people coming in.
Especially during the war. I mean,
before the war. In the Reed Johnson
war, we sent ships back.
But the Reed Johnson Restrictive Immigration Act was 1924.
Yeah,
that's why my father had to come in illegally. He came on a boat loaded with Scotch whiskey. He said it was during Prohibition. My mother got in okay through Ellis Island. It was a chain. My father had to come in illegally, which he managed to. But that was America in the 20s and 30s. The doors were shut. We wanted nothing to do with immigrants. Nothing is new. Everything gets repeated. So you have to understand the 20s and 30s to understand where we are now in the 21st century.
Well, I mean, listen, my grandfather talked about how he came through Ellis Island, and because of Teddy Roosevelt's immigration legislation in the early 1900s, Italians were to be designated as non-Caucasian,
Yeah.
and so that was a very
That was eugenics.
yeah,
You know, we were teaching eugenics in the American public school system. When Hitler wrote Mein Kampf, he wrote a letter congratulating America on getting it right, so that Hitler learned everything he knew about eugenics from a few Germans and a lot of Americans.
yeah, no, it's fascinating. But I want to segue because this country, this beautiful country that you and I live in,
And love.
and love created the two of us because we were both middle class people. And
Yep.
without higher education and the enrichment that you get from higher education, the continuous learning, the curiosity, the fire that gets ignited at an undergraduate university, you don't end up having the lives that we've had, these interesting lives that we've had. So tell us about higher education in America, the Moral Land Grant Acts
Well,
of the 19th century, and this beautiful book that you've written about education.
well, you need about 2 or 3 weeks or a 15-week course for this, Anthony. But the American higher education is unique among anything in the world. There's nothing like it. We have 6,000 degree granting institutions. Some are tiny, some are huge, some are faith-based. We have religious institutions. There's nothing like it in the world. There's no Holy Cross in the Soviet Union. There's no Notre Dame in Iran. There's no Brigham Young anywhere. There's no MIT, no Harvard, or Bryn Mawr. They don't exist in any other country. The rest of the world has civil servants, and we have anarchists like or myself or you. There's a little bit of ungovernability about you, a little bit of ungovernability about me, and we are the products of American higher education. We take adolescent kids, much younger than the Europeans, and say to them, come in. You don't have to pick a major for 2 years. You can start out wanting to be a doctor and end up being an Episcopalian priest. No other country does that. When at the age of 11 in Europe, Germany, Italy, most of the other countries, China, they tell you at the age of 11, you're going to be a doctor, you're going to clean toilets. Well, we don't do that. We waste time, we waste a lot of everything, but we are unique. There's nothing like American higher education. The rest of the world's teachers as faculty are civil servants. They work for the state. The American academic is ungovernable and works for nobody. So, and yet we have never been less popular. The rest of the country right now considers American universities, American higher education, the biggest problem that they've got. It's worse than China. It's worse than Iran, worse than anything. The American colleges and universities. That's the general impression that Americans have of their colleges and universities. At the same time, they don't want to recognize that we are the envy of the world. The rest of the world has already sent 1 million of their children to American colleges. If we would let them in, they'd send 2 million, or they'd come themselves, because what they want is what they don't have and what we have, a kind of unbelievable freedom to learn and to do pretty much whatever you want. American people don't like what they have now. In the 20s and 30s, nobody cared. I learned my Civil War history from Gone with the Wind. I thought that was it. Everything was, and I learned we cared more about Newt Rockne, All-American, and Pat O'Brien playing Newt Rockne and Ronald Reagan playing the Gipper in 1940 than we cared. People knew who they were. They wouldn't have known who the president of the University of Chicago or Harvard was. They didn't care. What was the American image of college student? It was Groucho Marx and horse feathers. They laughed at it. He was president of Huxley College trying to win the big game against Darwin College and hired 2 professionals, his brother Chico and Harpo, to play on the football team. It was anarchy, chaos, and funny. And Americans prefer their colleges and universities that way, right up through John Belushi in Animal House, 1978. We don't want our colleges to be successful or serious. We win the Nobel Prizes. We are the envy of the world, and they don't care.
So I want to test a few things on you because there's a couple of big revelations in your book. I want to talk about the GI Bill in a second, but before that, I want to test something on you. So the freedom of speech that the United States has in its Constitution, and the freedom of the press, it checks people in power. It's the fourth estate. It holds people in power, but it has this ancillary effect, Professor, in the sense that it's a wide berth for creativity. We teach our young people that they can think and speak freely. They go on to create Facebook, eBay. They go on to create things like Tesla. I mean, I could name all these great
Well, we
innovations.
also have people like Edison or Henry Ford or John Rockefeller who never went to college. We love them, though, also.
Yeah, yeah. But my point is that this freedom, this petri dish, it does have some excesses to it or fat tails. One of them is the protest movement. One of them is, the silent majority may not like certain. I've always viewed our universities as the lungs of the First Amendment. Meaning,
They
you know,
they love Division I athletics. They
yeah,
love the transfer portal. They love the billion-dollar industry now, hundreds of billions of dollars of gambling that's going on. There's not much criticism of that, but that is one of the great disgraces of higher education. But it'll never go away because we love it.
when I was an undergrad, there was a protest movement. People went into Blue Hall. They occupied it because they wanted the university to divest from South Africa.
Right?
There was a struggle against the apartheid movement in South Africa,
Yeah,
and you and Jean Mayer, then the president of the university. The protest lasted a little while, but it ended quite peacefully. What do you
yeah.
think's going on today in comparison to protests, say 30 or 40 years ago?
Not that much different, Anthony. They want to politicize. Kids want to politicize the university. They want the university to have a foreign policy and have political opinions. My response to that, Mayer's response was also the same. Our job is to protect your political opinions. Universities don't have a political opinion, so we're going to keep our mouths shut and teach evidence as much as we possibly can. But we also had a cover at that time, the Sullivan principles. So we were able to divest a little bit or do something. It sort of placated the kids. And before long, Mandela got in. De Klerk didn't blow up the world because he had 8 atomic weapons and dismantled them, and it ended. But South Africa was very much a training ground, just as Vietnam had been a training ground for college campus protest before that. Nobody protested in the 20s or 30s. They didn't care about what was going on in the rest of the world. They didn't care about Nazism. They cared mostly about white people not keep staying in power. That character in The Great Gatsby, who you meet on page 2, Tom Buchanan, Yale graduate 1915, said the white people are losing authority. The blacks and people of color are taking over the world. That's what he learned at Yale.
Yeah,
So
so it's interesting. I mean, there was one great protest in the early 30s that were the World War I veterans. They descended
well,
upon
that was the March on Washington.
the
Yeah.
March on Washington. And remember what MacArthur had to do.
MacArthur put him down.
Yeah, yeah, it
Yeah,
was a
but
very
that wasn't a college protest.
no,
These
no,
people
it
were
was
basically uneducated.
100%.
The vast majority of American soldiers in World War I
Yeah,
were illiteracy was the major problem, and bad teeth. There were more people who were discharged from the army because of bad oral hygiene. They had no teeth and they had gum infections, and illiteracy. It was the biggest two problems. That's why the GI Bill was such a transformative thing
and
and changed America forever.
this is a real segue. I think of all of the social programs in America, the thing I got out of your book, and I want you to react to it, is that the GI Bill did more to create the American dream than anything that I could think of, because you took Jews from East New York and Italians from Williamsburg, Brooklyn, who had no shot at getting educated. They came out of the army and they were told by the U.S. government that their tuitions were going to get paid for. So they showed
Yeah,
up at Pace University. or Hofstra or CUNY,
Anywhere they wanted.
and they went from blue collar families to white collar aspirational living. Tell us a little about the GI Bill.
First of all, it was an accident.
Yes, of course.
The
Tell us
American
about the
Legion.
accident of the GI Bill.
The American Legion did not want a repeat of World War I or the end of World War I, when there were 200,000 soldiers coming back whose jobs had been taken by somebody else. So they wanted to create a means by which maybe 250,000 returning soldiers could hold off for a year or two or three or even four and let the economy settle down. Well, 250,000 and go to college. 250,000 didn't go to college. 7 million did. They never expected this tidal wave of soldiers coming back who decided they wanted an education. So it shocked them. The colleges all of a sudden exploded, needed anybody standing in front of a classroom. That's how I got my opportunity to teach anywhere I wanted. It was before World War II, the faculty was 99% male, Protestant, white.
Right.
The student body was 90% white, Protestant, male. And that was it. World War II changed it all, and the GI Bill was basically responsible for that.
But so I want you to react to this, because I think about this often. World War II changed so many different things, but think of The Man in the Gray Flannel Suit for a second, and the Sinclair Lewis book. Think of Mad Men, the television series. These men, mostly men, they came back from the war.
1 million more married war brides.
Right. 1 million married war brides. They come back from the war. They have this organizational structure of the military. They apply it to corporations.
They matured. They were much more mature.
They were much more mature, and they applied it to businesses large and small, but they also applied it to American politics. 85% of our members of the Congress, both in the Senate and the House of Representatives, came out of the war.
That's the big change now. Now, when the draft ended in 73, that ended 99% of the country's relationship with the military. Now you've got hardly any. You got this group of people who do all the fighting, and most of the Americans don't know any of them.
But I think it's contributed to the great polarity of our time. Do you know?
Oh, yeah.
George McGovern couldn't really fight with Bob Dole. They both served in World War II.
Yeah.
And even though they were ideologically opposed, they loved the country and the Constitution.
It didn't save John Kerry in Vietnam.
Right.
He lost, they made fun of him or whatever they did. They made it a political thing. It didn't even the senator from Arizona, John McCain, that it didn't help him, even though he was in the Hanoi Hilton. So by that time, Americans were getting sort of already isolated, and it's got the complete separation between military soldiers fighting wherever they are fighting now, and the rest of the population. And the Congress reflects that.
So we still have the largest economy. We still have the largest amount of business startups, the largest amount of venture capital. Most of this flows from this great asset that the United States has, which is its higher education.
It's research. It's research.
Research, yes. And yet we have this bad rap about higher education.
And we win all the Nobel Prizes also.
We win the Nobel Prize. So I want to put you in charge for a few minutes. You're now the Mad Men marketing executive. You're the ad guy for higher education. What is the message that America would need to hear about their higher education?
Just try not to be quite so anti-intellectual. And now, American higher education has shot itself in the foot. We make terrible mistakes also. The costs are out of control. It's $1.7 trillion of debt. Biden is trying to deal with it. He can't. And people yell and scream. The big-time athletics is a disaster. We have scandals of people trying to get their kids into prestigious schools. Besides March Madness, the football thing, we have Stanford football players flying now to the East Coast to play games. So we create an insanity, and there are many, many mistakes in higher education. At the same time, just acknowledge that we are the envy of the world. And the rest of the world, even though you don't want to acknowledge it, normal John Q. Public America, just accept the fact that our research, our Nobel Prize winning research, is the greatest in the world. And the University of Shanghai, the Chinese monitor this very closely. They have a list of the 50 best research universities in the world, and you publish that list, and 40 of them are American. And the Chinese themselves acknowledge this. They have spent billions and billions in trying to catch up. They have not yet. And ironically, they haven't yet because we have let our research become what it always should be, free and unfettered research to break through and make great discoveries. That doesn't happen anywhere else in the world. Hitler had an opportunity. The Germans had the greatest educational system in the world up until 1933. Then he politicized it, destroyed it, and within 10 years, we got the bomb. The only reason we got the bomb is we got the Germans and Hungarians who helped us get the bomb.
Well, Saul, you ignited a fire in me of lifetime learning. And so as a result of you, I've read more than my share of Rilke, more than my share of Bertolt Brecht. I've read passages of Goethe. And
it's what it all is about, Anthony. It's lifelong learning. That's why it's called commencement. It's the beginning.
Right. Amen. But I want you to react to this for a second, because you said this to me 40 years ago and I didn't fully understand it. But what you basically said was that Adolf Hitler was a man. And, we have a tendency to demonize him today. Okay. And yes, he could have been perhaps one of the most evil people to live, or at least the most evil that we're able to historically record. But what is it about human nature, Saul, that creates somebody like Adolf Hitler? Because we can demonize him and two-dimensionalize him, but we have to recognize, because you asked me to read a book called Damien by Hermann Hesse. And in that book, we talked about the abraxas, the good and bad in each of us, and that we're blended between good and bad. And some of us have more bad than good and vice versa. So what do we learn about human nature and people like Adolf Hitler?
I think I remember, if I can remember my lectures about that all through that semester, I talked about also the need for a scapegoat. You've got to have somebody you can hate. And we've only got 6,000 years of recorded history. I remember telling you that too. All we got is the evidence of 6,000 years of recorded history. And in those 6,000 years, we have never been able to stop killing in the name of something. And once you find a scapegoat and you've got the technology to be able to kill a lot of people, then you get the mass death that we're getting, that Hitler got to, World War I got to. Since World War I, it's been mass death. We can kill more and more and more people because our technology has gotten better to be able to do this. We're now in the atomic age, and all we can do is hope that we don't blow the world up.
But what is it about evil, Saul? Tell me.
This was the kind of the question that I would leave to you. I'd say you can either describe us as a naked ape, I remember telling you about the book by Konrad Lorenz called On Aggression. Yeah. Is there a kind of aggression in this evolutionary creation that has evolved into what we are, simians? Or do we have a spirit? Do we have a soul? Is there an afterlife? Those are questions that only you can answer. You have to answer them themselves. The evidence that I can show you and that I showed you then was the results of 6,000 years of recorded history. That's all we had to look back on. And that 6,000 years has been nothing but aggression. Hitler found the perfect device. He found the Jew. He was just the right number of Germans. I think I said this to you then, when he started out, I don't think he had the Holocaust in mind. It came to that. Initially, all he wanted to do was get rid of them and send them someplace. America didn't want them. Nobody wanted them. So they had no place to go. And they wound up among the 50 million Europeans who died. 6 million were Jews. 14 million were Russians. God knows how many gypsies. But you had to find people that other people were willing to despise. And that has been the nature. That's the way it's been. Yeah, we haven't really gotten away from it. We're looking for enemies now to
Okay, so
demonize.
yeah, well, I mean, listen, the Jewish population is now back to where it was prior to
14
World War
million.
II.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so it was obviously absolutely devastated. The tell us a little bit about Theodore Herzl, who he
Well, you know,
was.
anti Herzl is an interesting example because you don't hear too much about him in this debate.
Right.
Herzl was a Hungarian Jew who was totally secular. Right? He didn't want to get bar mitzvahed. He didn't want to speak any language but German. He wanted nothing to do with anything. And then he almost converted to Catholicism. And then between that and the trials of the French general staff in 1894, he got the idea of Zionism. What did he have in mind in Zionism? He wanted a German-speaking, secular state, no religious test at all. His first choice might have been Argentina. Uh, he started the Zionist movement in 1894. He died 10 years later in 1904 at the age of 44, still trying for Kenya in the last year of his life. But he died, and then Zionism focused more on the Holy Land. Uh, the anti-Semitism will never disappear, but how it came to the Holy Land, if those people could have gotten to America, they would have gone to America. That's where they really wanted to go. But when the doors were shut everywhere else, and then at the end of World War II, after the Holocaust, Europe solved its political problem by getting rid of the rest of its Jews, and the 2 million Palestinians who were there already, they had to pay the price. So right, wrong? I don't think you're ever going to get to right or wrong. I don't think there's an answer right or wrong now to Gaza and Israel. You have to make up your own minds about that. And that's where the university comes in. How do you teach these subjects in a way that gives the student an opportunity to come to his own conclusions?
Oh, listen, I respect that. I guess the thing I would say about all of this is something that you and I both know. We've watched the Northern Irish situation with the UK.
Protestants and Catholics hating each other.
Catholics. We can talk about
The 30 Years' War. Catholics and Protestants butchered each other.
We can talk about centuries in the 6,000 years. We can talk about centuries of hatred. And we can talk about the
millennia, not centuries,
right?
Millennia of hatred.
Yeah, and obviously, Shakespeare writes about this in Romeo and Juliet, and you have this tribal hatred, and usually the great irony of this is it's usually people that have a lot in common. Saul.
Well, the Book of Numbers,
family members. They could be family members.
Book of Joshua. You read the Book of Joshua, and he says, "Kill every man, woman, and child in Ai." The Canaanites, they were vessels of evil. Who knows how different the Canaanites were from the Hebrews? I don't think anybody's been able to make certain. Archaeologists can't figure it out. But this need for finding someone who you can dehumanize, human nature hasn't been able to deal with that successfully yet.
Before we go, though, I want to switch to something fun. Okay, the baseball field is named after you at Tufts.
Yeah.
Mazel tov on that. Very
Thank
nice.
you.
Okay. Nice mitzvah for you, and you deserve it. But the question
I'm not sure about that, but that's nice of you to say so.
Why do we have such a love affair in America? I mean, the Europeans are looking at us like we're crazy. You and I watch a baseball game. I could watch 200 of them a year. I'm riveted by every pitch. And I see the game as a mental game and a physical game and an individual game and a team. But why do we like baseball as Americans?
One other footnote, though, Anthony, I'll get to that in a second. But remember, baseball also is as American as apple pie. It was a white man's game until Branch Rickey and Jackie Robinson changed that in 1947. Coming back from World War II, it was going to be business as usual. The women were going to go back. Levittown was, you could not sell your property to a Negro. Yeah. That's the way it's in the protocol language. But Robinson and Rickey came along and changed baseball and changed the national pastime, so that even at baseball, which I taught baseball history for 15 years at Tufts, also reflected all the pros and cons of American prejudice. And we are a nation that has always had a prejudice. We create our own narrative and believe we've fallen we create a narrative, but there are several different truths about American history. Baseball, the big thing about baseball when it was created was to make sure it had no English roots. They used to yell and cheer, no rounders, no cricket. Baseball has nothing to do with cricket. Well, that's not true. Baseball, if you look at the way they turn their hips, baseball is an evolution of cricket or the English game rounders. But Americans fell in love with it because it was fast. It was a fast game. And then Babe Ruth learned to turn his hips. Up until then, it was a game of separate hands. Ruth learned to turn his hips, hit home runs. Americans loved it. And that love affair has only gotten bigger. Now you can gamble on it, just like you can gamble on you can gamble on basketball and football more. I'm not sure if America is baseball is the American pastime any longer, because it's not as easy to gamble as you can on football and basketball, where you can cheat.
Listen, it's still, like you said, it's a part of the Americana.
But it's part of Americana, and it's a myth that we want to maintain, the national pastime. Football is more the national pastime. March Madness is more the national pastime. More money is spent gambling there than spent on gambling on baseball.
Okay, of course, another great book by you, Reynolds, Rashi, and Lopat, New York's Big Three in the Yankee Dynasty, 1949 to 53. And there's an amazing book about those three pitchers.
It really is. It's, I think, the best book I ever wrote, because it was a time DiMaggio was in decline. Mantle was breaking water fountains, was not yet there. And three veteran ethnic pitchers, one a Polish American, one a Italian American, and one an American, Native American, part Creek Indian, Native American. None of them is in the Hall of Fame. They're all forgotten. People don't even know who they are anymore. Created a record that nobody will ever break. 5 consecutive World Series victories, championships, 49 to 53.
And of course, the great Yogi Berra was catching.
Berra was there.
So it's important.
But they taught Berra how to be a catcher. Berra would never even call curveballs because he was afraid to have, with a man on base, he was afraid that to have a curveball come at him if a runner was on first base. He was terrified of Robinson and Reese. And they played the Mayor's Cup game in 46, 7, 8, 9, 3-game series before the season began. And Robinson and Reese used to steal Berra's jock. Yeah. They were despaired that Berra would ever become a catcher.
Famously argued about that play at home plate, which
he yelled. He argued until his day. But if you take a close play, he made it close. He was behind the plate. Yeah. He had to reach forward. You can look at that video a million times, and Berra will keep arguing, but he will not argue where he was standing. Yeah. He was behind the plate.
Yogi told me in Steinbrenner's box that Robinson was out, but he loved Jackie Robinson.
They got along. They got along. Berra didn't have a bigoted bone in his body.
No. Or Ralph Branca, for that matter.
Branca was another great guy.
They were very proud that
they were two great. And I'll tell you a third one who just passed away is Carl Erskine.
Yeah,
a truly great guy. Indiana, where the Ku Klux Klan felt very happy all during the 30s and 40s. This is the best thing that Indiana ever did, was create Carl Erskine.
Yeah, amazing, Sal. So I have 5 famous words at the end of my podcast. I read out the word. I ask my author to react to it. You can give me a word back or a sentence, but something that comes to your mind immediately, okay? I say the word teaching. You think what?
Objectivity, detachment, disinterest, not your opinion. Give the arguments and get out of it.
Okay. I say the word education. You say what?
Education is when the teacher can get the evidence out without getting his own opinion in.
Okay. I say higher education.
That's what the university is all about. Higher education, the little American college that transforms your life. That's a miracle. They don't exist anywhere in the world.
Well, it did it for me. So I was in a family of people that were all blue-collar people. Nobody went to college. And so I was obviously the first person in my family to go to law school after college. And so it was a unique experience for me. I'll always be grateful for that. I say Tufts. You say what?
I say transition from college to university and all the problems associated with that. Are we we're a teaching university where everybody has to do research. That's tough. Teaching university where everybody has to do research. You have to be a good teacher and you have to be a productive researcher. That's a problem. That's very few schools have that burden. Dartmouth, Georgetown, Tufts, a couple of smaller schools that are neither small nor large. And that's a toughie. I was an okay researcher and a very good teacher.
Okay, my last word. Okay, and I'm going to give you the last word, of course. I say the word America.
America, who owns the narrative? Who gets to tell the story? That's what the fight is all about now. It's who controls the narrative, who gets to describe what America really is all about. And that's what the fight is. They call it the culture wars, but it's who owns the narrative. And you tamper with American narratives, you do so at your own risk. We don't want to hear nasty things about Columbus or about Custer or about slavery. We think that there is a nicer story to tell, and that's the one we want to hear.
Yeah, it's very fascinating, Saul. The title of the book is An Accidental Triumph, The Improbable History of American Higher Education. It's written by Professor Saul Gittleman. And Saul, you made a big impact on my life. I hope you know how big of an impact. And so I'm very grateful to you all.
It's what we're in the business to do, Anthony. Take care.
There's powerful identities now, left, right, red, blue. And I think what draws those identities together is a sense of what the threats are in the world and a sense of who the victims are. And, we are the victims in our mind more than we're the perpetrators, right? We morally typecast ourselves as righteous victims, suffering from the evil policies of someone else. Now, the interesting thing about these kind of figures is that many people think of them as villains, but I think they often think of themselves as victims. And that drives people who like them to feel like victims too, right? So Putin, has famously said, talk about this in the book, how he is a victim. He's a victim of the West. He's a victim of these conspiracies. He went to war against an innocent country and killed ex-KGB officers like in hospitals in foreign governments, right? Like he's done all sorts of terrible things. And he says, look, I'm the victim here. And so I think what that highlights, one, is the power of victimhood, or at least its expression to draw people together. And two, how victimhood is a matter of perception, right? Like you can get people who survived the Holocaust think of themselves as less of a victim than Putin or than someone who got, their order messed up at Starbucks.
This is Open Book. I am your host, Anthony Scaramucci. Joining us is Professor Kurt Gray. He's a professor in psychology and neuroscience at UNC Chapel Hill. The title of the book is Outraged: Why We Fight About Morality and Politics and How to Find Common Ground. What a topical book. I probably needed this book in 2016. Maybe I needed it in 2008. Goes way back for me, Professor Gray. But let's talk, before we get into the book, let's talk a little bit about you. Tell us a little bit about your background, how you got to that beautiful university, Michael Jordan's campus down there. Tell us a little bit about your odyssey to UNC Chapel Hill.
Sure. So I grew up in Calgary, the Texas of Canada. So growing up in a progressive country, but in a more conservative province. And then I had a bunch of experiences that really made me focus on this topic. Like when I was 5, my dad married my stepmom. She comes from a big evangelical family in Nebraska. I went down as a Canadian kid, a foreigner, a step kid. They opened their arms to me. And later, when I went down there, I thought we agreed about everything. Swimming in the pond, playing in the hayloft, all awesome. But as I got older, I realized that we disagreed about a number of things. Gay marriage, right, being one of those things. And yet I couldn't just say that they were evil or stupid because I knew they were good people. I knew they loved me, knew they were thoughtful. And so that kind of kicked off a lot of my research on the moral mind, how we can disagree about things and yet still be good people. And that kind of what motivated the research that feeds into the book.
Well, listen, I've been in the crosshairs for a decade, so everybody dislikes me. Professor, maybe you could be my therapist for a moment. The Trumpers hate me because I left Trump. The Democrats will never accept me because I was with Trump, and I get shot at in every different direction. But I think something happened in the society. There was a break in the society somewhere. Like I don't know. I've been a supporter of gay marriage here in New York. I helped Andrew Cuomo get that law passed as a Republican. I funded state senatorial campaigns for that to happen. My attitude on gay marriage is people should be able to live their truth, and whatever it is that their truth is, we should be accepting of it and be loving about it, and that's it. And I applauded Barack Obama as a Republican when he tried to nationalize gay marriage. He was successful in nationalizing it. But now there's a backlash. There's a backlash against progressive ideas, a backlash against what people derisively call wokeism. Donald Trump represents that with his sort of orange evangelism. And so what happened, though? Why can't we live and let live? Like, why your lifestyle, and I mean this with no disrespect, I'm completely indifferent to it, sir, as I would hope you're indifferent to my lifestyle. You know, I want you to be happy, and God bless you. Why can't we be that way, sir? What is it about all of us?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a change that's been happening for a long time. So, I talk about in the book how, we evolved as a species being preyed upon a lot more than we think. We evolved being a lot more afraid than we think. It's why our kids fear the dark, right? It's why we think there's something under the bed. It's why if you're going out to walk at night and you're walking through a dark alley, you get a little nervous, even if you're big and tough, right? We fear all sorts of things. And now that society's safer, we don't get eaten by wild animals, there's less crime than there used to be. Now we have the space and the mental bandwidth to worry about threats that are more cultural,
good point.
More like culture wars. And so I think that's where
we've taken this tribal territorial survivalism and we've channeled it into things that are a little bit more petty.
Yeah, or just that we agree are not often matters of life and death, although they may be to some, right? And so we're just like more about like, is what you write on social media, is it terrible? Is cancel being terrible? These things that if we told someone 200 years ago, they'd think, you're arguing about what?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And social media, as you point out, it's affecting us, right? We're getting algorithmically channeled into reinforcing our ideas. We're finding things on the algorithm pays for outrage. They have found that if you feel outraged, Professor, or I feel outraged, we stay on the channel longer. We'll doom scroll the channel. So we do that, right? We're both, I'm a victim of that. I'll confess that. I don't know if you're
all human.
Yeah, I do it. And so is there a way to back out of that? Or is there a way to paint? Is there an optimistic future that we can all have here? That's a big central thesis of your book. How do we find that common ground among all of us?
Yeah, so I think there is optimism, and I think most people in America don't like being angry. They don't like yelling on social media, even if we feel compelled to keep scrolling because we're on X and Facebook and those algorithms keep us scrolling. Most people don't want to be angry and they don't want to be on that. And then the book's central thesis is really about, well, how do we make sense of common ground? And I think to do that, we need to understand how our minds work. And what they really focus on when it comes to morality are questions of harm, questions of who's being victimized and by whom. And I think when we recognize how each of us kind of understands the harms and the victimization in the world that we see, it allows other people to kind of figure out, get inside our head and find some common ground. And so I say in the book, if you want to understand people's moral judgments, ask yourself, what are the harms that they see?
Okay. I've got to test a few things on you based on some of the foundational principles in your book. You say in the book that we're the same. We conservatives, liberals, we have sort of the same moral foundation, but we're different in terms of the perception of what harms are in a society. So give us examples of that. Explain it. Maybe give us an example through a controversial topic like immigration, or an even more controversial topic like abortion.
Right.
How do we size up and how do we relate?
Yeah, so the nice thing about this understanding of harm as the kind of basis of morality is that it allows us to understand every hot button issue that's out there. And not just a hot button issue in politics, but also arguments with our spouse or a coworker. It's always about who's victimized and who's vulnerable. Immigration. Progressives are worried about the harm that migrants face at the border. They're fleeing violence in their home country, and they're getting victimized at the border by ICE, deportation. On the other hand, conservatives, right, they're worried about the harms to citizens, people taking jobs, people coming into the country, dealing drugs, perpetrating crimes, right? Those are the concerns. Abortion, right? Progressives are worried about harm to women who can't choose their reproductive rights care, things like this. More pro-life folks worried about fetuses and their kind of suffering, right? And underlying these things, it's not a different kind of concern about health or well-being. Everyone's concerned about helping people thrive, right? About protecting the vulnerable, but there's different assumptions about who or what is most vulnerable to harm.
Okay. I love it. Take it a step further. Talk about moral typecasting, where we tend to see people as either heroes or villains or victims. Why do we put people in those buckets? And what is, when I say the words moral typecasting, what does it mean to you?
Yeah. So we typecast all sorts of folks in Hollywood based on their roles. So if you see Daniel Radcliffe, your first thought's going to be Harry Potter, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
But we also typecast people into moral roles as either villains or as victims. And then once they get that moral role, it's sticky. So you talk about, Republicans and Democrats both kind of giving you grief, right? Those folks have maybe typecast you more as a villain than a victim. I don't know, right? But certainly when we perceive others, think Brian Thompson, right? The CEO of United Healthcare. Many people, especially progressives, saw him as a villain, right? As profiting off the suffering of people who couldn't afford healthcare treatment. When he was murdered, people's opinions stayed the same, right? They still saw him mostly as a villain and just wrote off his murder as something to celebrate or something we shouldn't worry about because he was rich, right, and powerful. And so that's moral typecasting. It's the stickiness. If you know someone in your life, right, who seems to be always victimized, then when they do something bad, you don't see them as responsible, as blameworthy. But if you see someone who's like bad and then they're harmed, you kind of ignore that. And so every kind of court case comes down to kind of who's the victim, right? Like Amber Heard, Johnny Depp, right? The question is like, who's the villain, who's the victim? And once you pick someone as your villain, then the other person seems like the victim and vice versa, right? So these are really powerful roles in our mind.
Mm-hmm. I feel like we do that with everybody, though, don't we? Don't we do that with our family members sometimes? We do it with our staff or fellow employees. We do it with our neighbors. Isn't it something we do with everybody, or is it?
Yeah, we do it with everyone, especially those we don't know really well. All right, so if it's your mom, it's your dad, it's your kid, it's your cousin, you don't typecast them quite as much because you know they're complex. Although you can still get there, right? Like maybe your dad, he says some stuff, he does some stuff, right? In your mind, he's always going to be the villain. Let's say he cheats on your mom. It's an act that you think is so beyond the pale that now even when your dad's suffering or he's sad, you're like, well, it's your fault, Dad, right? It's like you shouldn't have done this and you can't be victimized. So you can certainly do that with your family. It's a little more harder because you know their complexities, but I do think we do it with everyone. There's that person at the PTA meeting, they are always sad and you're like, oh, they're a victim, right? I wish that other parent wasn't so mean to them.
Well, my adult kids are still doing that to me, Kurt, so I'm fine with it. It is what it is. You can't really escape that, And by the way, kids side with their mom. I mean, I know you're the shrink here, and I'm just the podcaster, but kids side with their mom. They don't give a shit about that. I mean, if you get into a fight with the mother, they're running towards the mother, and then anything comes out of her mouth is the gospel. Anything comes out of your mouth is a lie. It's just the way it is. And so It's fine. That'll be for another podcast when you write the book about how to deal with the that's a bestseller, by the way. Tell the typecasting of the ex-husband.
Yeah, there you go.
All right. So we've had the social media play a huge role. Okay, but you're also saying in the book that we have these figures in our life: Vladimir Putin, Elon Musk, Donald Trump. I could name them. Mark Zuckerberg. These are people that are universally known by a large set of people. And some liberals love those names, and some liberals hate those names, and some conservatives love, and some conservatives hate those names. But explain to me what's happening right now. Explain for us the context of somebody like a Putin or a Musk, or how do they fit into our own, even though these are people, frankly, I don't know either of those people. I've never met either of those people. Somehow they're in our field of vision and they're part of our identity. They're part of our narratives. They're part of who we are.
Yeah. So there's powerful identities now, left, right, red, blue. And I think what draws those identities together is a sense of what the threats are in the world and a sense of who the victims are. And, we are the victims in our mind. More than we're the perpetrators, right? We morally typecast ourselves as righteous victims suffering from the evil policies of someone else. Now, the interesting thing about these kind of figures is that many people think of them as villains, but I think they often think of themselves as victims. And that drives people who like them to feel like victims too, right? So Putin, has famously said, talk about this in the book, how he is a victim. He's a victim of the West. He's a victim of these conspiracies. I mean, he went to war against an innocent country and killed ex-KGB officers like in hospitals in foreign governments, right? Like he did all sorts of terrible things. And he says, look, I'm the victim here. And so I think what that highlights, one, is the power of victimhood, or at least its expression to draw people together. And two, how victimhood is a matter of perception, right? Like you can get people who survived the Holocaust think of themselves as less of a victim than Putin or than someone who got, their order messed up at Starbucks.
It's manipulative though, right? It's a little sociopathic, right?
Sometimes. I mean, I think in Putin's case, there's no question. But I think in some other cases, people can feel legitimately jilted by some bad thing that happened to them, even if it was relatively minor, we might agree, kind of objectively speaking. But here's the weird thing, right? Like, what does it mean to be objectively suffering? Some people can put their hand in a hole with bullet ants, right, and feel like the worst pain imaginable and kind of shrug it off. And other people can, stub their toe and think it's like a conspiracy against them to make them feel pain. So it's a lot of it is in our mind.
Right. Well said. I've had Robert Greene, the legendary author of the 48 Laws of Power, on the show, and he talks about victimhood. And he doesn't like victimhood much. His theory is that that self-pity is one of our worst traits. We have to get out of the self-pity and get out of the self-doubt that comes with self-pity and quote unquote not play the victim. How do you react to that?
I think it's a fair point, and I think we'd probably be better off if we're not wallowing in self-pity. At the same time, it's just the facts of the matter that our moral convictions are about victimhood. And one of the most powerful motivating forces in politics, right, and interpersonal relations is about feelings of victimhood. And so we shouldn't revel in it, but at the same time, right, if someone says something to you, makes you feel victimized, someone hurts you, that's going to kind of fill your consciousness and you're going to have to react to it. So I think it's easier said than done.
We need the other side, don't we? Meaning, the world would be pretty, let's say we all agreed on everything. But that seems like a blander world, no? I know we like similar people, but we also like to fight a little bit, though, too. No, you write about it a little bit in the book, right? You say that we may actually need the other side. Explain that. Explain what you mean by that.
I mean, America was founded as a pluralistic democracy, right? And it's messy. They say like democracy is the worst form of government except for every other form of government, right? Mm-hmm. It's messy, but I think that messiness is why it's good. We have to kind of compromise and go between kind of two solutions. Jefferson said we needed a party of progress and a party of tradition. And so that navigating that kind of tension, I think, is really good for America and for us. And when you just have one party, well, you've got a dictatorship. You've got China, you've got Soviet Russia. And so even if we don't like the fact that we have to fight most of the time, I think it's better for us. Except today you mentioned, right, there's kind of a shift. We're unwilling to have these conversations, but I think we're better off when we do, and we find the kind of middle ground.
What is the best way to have a civil conversation with someone who sees the world completely different from the way you see it?
I'll tell you what's not the best way, and that's throwing facts at them. We ran a study, we asked people, what should another person do who disagrees with you? What should they use in a conversation to make you respect them? And everyone says, I want them to give me the facts. We say, great, here are some facts. Here are those facts. And they say, those are not facts. I don't like those facts. Those are not real facts. And that's because we live in different media ecosystems. Your facts are not my facts. Your facts are fake facts. It turns out the best way to have conversations is by using personal stories to reveal how your concerns about an issue are grounded in personal harm. So I may be pro-gun rights because my mom used a gun to defend ourselves, our family, from a home invader. Right? That's a story. You can understand how I'm trying to avoid harm, how I'm trying to escape victimization. And that's much better than me throwing statistics at you from Fox News or NPR.
Mm-hmm. What's the best outcome for us? Like, what do you see in the next decade? Are we a society that's more divided? Are we a society that can be put back together? Give us a sense for the future. Predict the future for us.
Yeah, so we've been getting more divided for a long time. And I guess as a psychologist and a scientist, the best predictor of the future is the recent past. Doesn't make me happy to think that or say that. At the same time, there's also breaking points that people reach in history. And so I like to think that we are reaching a breaking point where people are fed up with being divided. They're exhausted with yelling at each other, and they want a government that works. Mm-hmm. And so part of what's going to happen depends on the next 4 years, obviously. Mm-hmm. But if people feel like there's just too much tension, too much chaos, they'll yearn for more conversation, more stability, more conversation about each other and about finding common ground is a hope.
All right. So we're at the point in this podcast where I've come up with my producer 5 words, and I want you to react to those 5 words. Give me something, a sentence, a thought, something comes to mind. If I use the word harm, what do you think of?
I think of perception. We often think of harm as something that's obvious and objective, but people can disagree about what's most harmful. And this is what underlies our most, vicious debates.
Okay. If I say the word politics, you say what?
I'll say something that divides Americans today because of our moral disagreements. But politics is more than just moral disagreement, right? It's about the kind of systems and institutions that are built on that are really pulling us apart and really giving us a sense of us versus them. We used to be able to say, we disagree about this. Let's have a beer. Let's figure it out. Politics is what makes that harder than ever.
Mm-hmm. What if I say morality?
Something that evolved to help us live together in groups. So we were preyed upon as a species by wild animals, predators. We moved into groups together to protect ourselves. But then the biggest threat is other people trying to hurt us, trying to harm us, trying to kill us, trying to steal from us. We developed a sense of morality to make sure that we could live together in relative harmony, and that we could get angry at people who fail to cooperate. We'd kick them out of our group. We punish them. So morality is our psychological sense to enable us to live together.
What if I say the word division?
Undeniably true in today's political climate, but not as fundamental or as deep as we think. Most everyday Americans don't disagree on issues as much as they think they do. And there's actually a lot more space for agreement than we recognize. We overestimate our political disagreement by up to 200 or 300%. Whereas if you really get into what people believe, the space of disagreement, at least for everyday people, reasonable people, is actually pretty small.
Outraged. Say the word outraged.
One, a great book, but more importantly, something that we're really experiencing today. In part, social media really amplifies these feelings because they capture our attention, because it gets us to do things, to click, to write back angrily. But I think, it's many ways bad, especially when it's so overpowering, but it can be good too. Outrage can motivate us to, change our social circumstances, to appeal to politicians, to try to make the world a better place. So when it's too much, it's bad, but there's a right amount of outrage too, and it motivates change.
Listen, been great conversation with you. I think you're onto something here, and I love the optimism. I love the optimistic message in the book. The title of the book is Outraged: Why We Fight About Morality and Politics and How to Find Common Ground. Professor Kurt Gray, a professor of psychology and neuroscience at UNC Chapel Hill. Thank you so much for joining us today on Open Book.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
All right, that was great, man.